Those were my marching orders. So if we're all ready to go, I do teach here as well. I was just here last night between 6 and 9 o'clock. I teach a class. I typically try to teach a class. Well, I teach a class one semester a year. And the one we're doing this semester is the impact of London on the world. So I looked at 19th century, early 20th century politics, government, and architecture. And so we went through culture first, and we went through government, and now we just finished up last night on architecture and how Europe and London went from no tall buildings. You might remember that when you looked at biscuit tins in the view of London, you would see Parliament, right, Westminster, and then you would see maybe St. Paul's, and then maybe the BT Tower, and that was it. But now it has a proper skyscrapers like everything else. And why? Why did that change? What was the issues that changed us? Anyway, just finished up doing that last night. So yeah, so I'm happy to be back here today, but I'd like being here during the day, but you are my students. So your your phones, all your electronic devices should be muted and turned off. This is a respectful environment. So if I say something you don't like, you cannot officially throw anything at me in the classroom. You must wait until I'm 10 feet away from the main door in the parking lot. That is the rule, okay? So I can be prepared and ready to defend myself. But in here, I'm very vulnerable. So you are too. So in this situation, we're very trusting, and we want to have a civil discourse. I have a PhD. That doesn't mean in any way at all that I'm someone that officially smart. There's a very good chance that all of you collectively or individually are smarter than me. But two things that getting a PhD teaches you. It teaches you a methodology, how to do research. That before you open up your mouth, you have a way of learning to weigh evidence together so that you're very conscious about what you say. You're very thoughtful, which I think 9 out of 10 people today do not do. So that may be one thing that I did learn, and I might not talk very much because of this kind of training. I'm very concerned that if I open my mouth, whatever I say, I need to defend it. So, and the second thing is to teach people that when we share ideas, none of us have a monopoly on knowledge. None of us have a monopoly on persuasion, that we're simply sharing in an exchange. So we do that in a very civil way. So I am just sharing with things. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, but this isn't my way or it's your way. It's our way. We're all going to come together. In fact, when this presentation is, I have I think it's short. I need to double check, but one of the last slides I have is a YouTube clip of Bertrand Russell, who was, in my opinion, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. I mean, his grandfather actually spoke to Napoleon. Can you imagine? And he lived until, I think, 1970. But what an amazing person that he shared his insights of all the ideas he learned. And a lot of these ideological, philosophical ideas coalesce around the time right before the Second World War and then right after the Second World War. So there he is analyzing all that information and sharing his thoughts. So it's very, very good. But one of the things he says, an eminent scholar, written so much work, and was a chancellor at Cambridge and all this stuff. He said, the worst thing that people do is get into the rut of dogmatism, that they're so sure of themselves that that's how they talk from. And there he is, so smart, so eminently intelligent in what he can share. And he said, don't even take what I say, it's always correct. I'm just trying to share it. So I just wanted to offer that. I also wanted to let you know, so I think Alice wanted me to introduce myself. So yeah, I teach here. I'm very happy to work at the Gillespie County Historical Society and the Pioneer Museum with a great team there that we work to help continue to create stories that keep that history alive. And we want to continue to embellish it and make it more expansive so that that history is very rich and that it continues in perpetuity. So here I am. Oh, somehow another Siri turned on. She is so confused because she's listening to an entire paragraph of me and doesn't have any idea what I'm asking. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Yes, ma'am.
There is a chat up there that says there's no sound.
I think, that was because I had it turned off. So, but thank you. I will ask this person. I'll say, Scott, can you hear now?
I can hear.
So yeah, because we have a multitude of things to turn on, but our mute is turned off. So I hope that Scott is ready to go. And he'll come back in just a minute. Okay, all right. So let me go back 1 second. I think I actually. Okay. All right. So this is a quote. We're going to look at this. Anybody know who said that? Okay. Well, it's someone very much connected to Hill Country history. He was a German and offered this philosophy about what made, for him coming to the New World, and what was explained to him by the Atlas of Rhine, made Texas so unique, was this concept of being, I want to be a free person. And even if that means not having convenience and nice things and comfortable things, I want to be free on a free earth. And I'm going to read a couple of passages from this book that, among many other things, a great book here that includes a couple of things that that he and his wife share with us from their early experience in the 1850s, which was 1860s and 1850s, which was very tough. You know, they lived a very, very hard life. And we all know what it must have been like with all those mosquitoes and scorpions. It must have freaked these poor Germans out. You know, like, what are all of these creatures? You know, even for me, I come from Vermont. And one thing I noticed about Texas, besides being so hot all the time, so I'm loving this. So Saturday, all right, bring it on. I'm going to be wearing a t-shirt and shorts. It's going to be like 40 degrees. That's the high. You're all going to be, what's wrong with that person? But I'm loving it. But the thing that I learned when I came to Texas was everything is bigger. I mean, all the bugs are bigger. I saw a bug just a month ago. I didn't even know what it was. It was a combination of an ant and a bug. And I was like, what even is that thing? So anyway, I walk around. Anyway, so I can only imagine what it was like for those Germans when they came there and that arduous trip, and then come here and learning about rattlesnakes and scorpions and all those sorts of things. So, okay, so what we'll do is I think we'll just we'll move along here. So we're looking at the role of ideas. I went ahead and just put as a concept these two people. Moise Bach, we all know, was one of the founding fathers of this community. And so he had to be inspired. You know, people are not just vacuous people. Something inspired them. Many of you are practicing Christians, but you can be practicing Jewish or Muslim, and you know how that faith in that religion inspires you. And it's not always on your wrist. You're not necessarily flying the flag, but it's inspiring your behavior. Something was inspiring him. And then I put right next to him Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant is known as the father of the Enlightenment. He is someone who was able to put together a range of ideas from Locke to Rousseau to Montesquieu, all these people, and put together a concept of what it means to advocate this idea of liberalism. So what we're going to do in this class, in this brief presentation with all of you, is to show you two overriding ideologies, liberalism and conservatism. Okay, these are our two kind of major ideologies, the bookends of the humanists, how we think. One is liberal and one is conservative. But what you're going to discover is no one lives in just one prism alone. It's always a combination. It's just, that's how it works. But you know, I always share with people, I get embarrassed when sometimes they say, are you a Christian? I say, I'm a Christian. Not that I'm embarrassed because of the popular culture being against it, but if you actually know what the word Christian means, it means to be Christ-like. And I fall short of that about every 10 minutes of my life. I say how embarrassing it is for me to say I'm Christ-like. I'm saying I am trying to be a Christian. I'm being a Christian. I want to be a Christian. You know, that's really, it's the act of what's really, really true. But when we look at these ideologies, it's a direction, it's a goal. I want to be Christian, let's say, I'm walking in that direction, but I haven't made it there. I am a liberal, not really, I'm walking that direction. I'm a conservative, not really, I'm walking in that direction. And what you find out is that your journey is circuitous. It's not some type of a linear geometrical shape. It does that. And by looking briefly at these Germans and then looking at the concept of ideology, it might relate a little bit to your own life today. And I think that would be really cool. So there's Immanuel Kant. He's very famous for this. Well, let me do this first. So what is ideology? Ideology is it's a system of beliefs that's trying to explain the world and motivate you, like a change action. And there I just gave you some very, very brief kind of one-dimensional linear explanation from liberal to conservative. And that's not the beginning of liberal and that's not the end of conservative. There's all kinds of things all in between. And I gave you the idea of free earth, free thinkers. those people were connected to Hill Country, Texas in the mid to late 19th century. So I just put that there to tell you that's just one example that fits into this concept of a political ideology. So saper aude. This is what Immanuel Kant said, which without my ridiculous accent, that basically means have the courage to think for yourself. Easy to say, have the courage to think for yourself, but how hard it is really to do that. And that is the anchor of liberalism, that whatever you do going forward, stop and have the courage to think for yourself. But that requires, as I was joking earlier with some people about eating the chocolate, you have to have the skill sets, you have to have the responsibility how to do that. Because it doesn't mean simply having the courage to say, I like orange walls. You know, I don't care what you think, I like orange walls. It's about being involved in a civic conversation of importance, and that you take the weight of that seriously and you're adding to it. So have the courage for your thing. And you know how hard it is? You know how you hear all kinds of things at a dinner party or with your friends, and people say things and you weigh up instantly. Is this worth a conversation or let it go? And we've all seen how Facebook, for instance, has changed. You might recall about, well, I don't know, now 6 or 7 years ago, Facebook used to have a lot of back and forth conversation. Now it's kind of like one-dimensional. People are saying all this stuff. You've got less friends and you're not saying anything. You're just going, okay, 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 you know? So people have responded. But anyway, so let's take a look at this. This is Professor Kapp. I want to show you Kapp, actually. This is the book. I want to read a couple of things from you that he said. This is a description of Professor Ernst Kapp, who is the person who came up with this expression that's the lead off for the title of this presentation. They were a courageous lot, and many lost their lives. Most were completely unprepared for the experiences they encountered, and some failed dismally. But all shared the feeling that the promise of success growing from their own hard work far outweighed their former security. Professor Ernst Kapp, accustomed to the genteel life of the cities, expressed what many felt. I depart voluntarily from my teaching position. I leave Germany, exchanging comfort for toil, the familiar pen for the unfamiliar spade, but I will be a free man and a free earth. So something is inspiring him to give up these very important creature comforts. If you all had the opportunity to be in the Pioneer Museum, you've seen the log cabins, you've seen the Kamla House, the Fossil Raider House. What you have not seen yet, which I hope to be able to do in a few years, is show you a demonstration of the very first structure that these Germans lived in. It was called palisade structure. And essentially what that was a ditch with sticks forming like an arch, and then you had thatch over it. That's what they actually lived in. So even the idea, oh, look at this charming 2-bedroom or 2-room log cabin, doesn't look very comfortable. That was luxurious compared to what they actually had to live in. And yet something inspired these people, knowing what they were going to encounter for something else. And that's what we're going to explore. What is this ideology that's inspiring them? And I did want to go ahead and follow up with what his wife said. The whole family, in Ida Kapp's words, seemed transformed by the surroundings and infected with energy and purpose. If someone portrayed life the way we here are living it, we sleep with a cover and a pillow on the floor for a semi-furnished room, do our cooking with one pot, one cauldron, and one cornbread pan for which we have to build a fire out in the yard, etc. Eating and drinking utensils consist of a few tin plates and tin cups. We have rented an ordinary kitchen table. For chairs, we use baskets and trunks. Yes, would someone have portrayed it to me? Yes, would someone have portrayed it to me, I would have laughed. And yet I don't know how it happens, but I never before have been more content and in better health. I now have the courage to tackle any and all things, and I know now that everything will take root. So this is what we're looking at, is these people are fully conscious, just like you. They made a choice. And I would like to find out what motivates them, because it probably motivates you all as well. So let's go ahead and look a little bit at what the world looked like at that time to put this ideology into context. You know, really what you see is you see action, reaction, action, reaction, action, and reaction. That's what's been going on really in the modern era. but we're just going to confine it to the French and the Napoleonic Wars. So when you look at 1789, 1815, the French Revolution is a seismic event, not the American Revolution. The American Revolution is an important event. The Renaissance is an important event. The Enlightenment is an important event. But the French Revolution, in terms of the modern era, is seismic because it completely reorientates the relationship between people and people in the state, people in authority. It seems strange for us, but to think about it now, but the general concept was there was a hereditary state of people who ruled. And because we were much more religious at the time, this aligned with Christian thought that the Lord aligned this. He chose you. I mean, a lot of people could adjudicate the difficulties in life by saying, God has always said there will be poor people. And it's under his will that there'll be poor people. You take care of them. There will always be people in charge of you. They have power. Their job is not to abuse it. There's the alignment of all social order seemed to be justified by God's actions. He said this was okay. The French Revolution says, no, God is not the center of the world. Man is the center of the world. We can recreate our world. We can create the world that we want to. And this isn't to be dismissive of the real concerns that the French people had, or to suggest that the only way to be a good Christian is to believe in a monarchy or an oligarchy. But it means to say that what inspired them to change away from that was completely different. Fundamentally different. And this is the origin and beginning of liberalism, where mankind, humans, become the center of the universe and not God. So that's where this starts. So here we go. We look at this concept here. French Revolution, there is a reaction and adjustment. There's revolution and unification, and there's imperialism. All of this takes place over about a 100-year period. And I'm just going to look at a couple of these, perhaps the revolution and unification of Germany as an example in the next slide to give you a sense of what we're talking about. Okay, so this stage of 1840, 1871 concerns our period, where a lot of our Germans are coming to Texas, and where there's also an enormous amount of immigration coming from Europe, whether it's the Irish and dealing with the potato blight, or Eastern Europeans, or something is changing. And I just gave you a couple of examples of what's changing here. Pig iron production. It's a very rough, rudimentary version of making iron. But with that, metallurgy is developing so that you can begin constructing more elaborate structures and infrastructure. This goes from 40,000 tons in 1825 in just 25 years or 20 years to over 250,000 tons. Europe is now, by 1871, its industry, its trains, its rails is being driven by steam. This is all absolutely, utterly brand new. And then cities are becoming the epicenter for meteorological and a textile industry. So what has always traditionally been the source of income, the land, is shifting to manufacturing. Now, this is going to be very, very different because even the level of manufacturing that existed, say that I needed to get a saddle fixed. Dana lives in my village. I go to Dana. I know Dana does this. I said, Dana, can you do a saddle for me? He says, yeah, it'll be $100 and I'll do it for you. We have an intimate relationship, but what's going to happen is in time, he's going to work for a factory and I'm not going to know who made my saddle, and he's not going to have the choice. I want to make one now. I've made enough money. I'm going to relax. He's going to work by a fixed number of hours. He's going to have an expectation to produce something. All of this begins to change in this period of time in the early 19th century. That's only 200 years ago. What we take for granted today has only been a very recent development in humankind. This just gives you an idea about urbanization, about where people are moving. Just gives you a couple of countries, England, Belgium, and Europe. The main thing that's important to see is everything is going up. That's the key thing, not necessarily the exact rate, but from 1800 until 1880, you see this rapid movement of people moving into the cities to begin living. Their hours are changing. And as you see here, I mentioned this issue of primogenitures. You know, primogeniture is an old concept. It's mostly related to land, but it's also to inherited wealth, that the eldest son gets everything. And the reason why that was designed is to make sure it doesn't spread apart. If you have like 4 sons and you spread it 4 ways, and then those 4 sons get married and it spreads, and then within a generation, you've lost all that wealth. So the idea was put it all in one person, and they inherit it. And then the second son, well, the second son typically had to go into clergy. Then the third son, what is the third son? Well, the third son probably had to go into the military. And the fourth son, maybe public service. The fifth son, he's really skinny, right? Or he's coming to America, right? So what happens is that society is changing. And as I'll show you with you another slide here, I think it comes up here. I'll get to it in just a minute. It's telling you about how society is benefiting with better nutrition, but it's actually going to affect migration. So here we're still talking about urbanization. And this class in London is amazing. Look at that. In 1800, there was 1 million people living in the environs in London. And in 100 years, it's up to 7 million. And even today, we're only about 8.5 million. So it didn't continue to grow. It's not 14 million there now. It stopped. But can you imagine that many people? What caused that? Well, you're building roads, you're building hospitals, you're building schools, you're building factories, you're building sewer systems, you're building gas lighting. All these things are affecting the human condition. And all of that is man-made. That is the natural transition for a lot of people to see man is fixing life. Man is adjusting technology to fit their needs. So this is subtly a transformation that from a child view of God solving all of our problems, there is a view that man can solve all of the problems. Women, when I say man, you all please know I'm referring to men and women, that mankind is a vehicle for any use. So it doesn't, but from a humanist point of view, they would concentrate on the fact that those of you who are trying to make that connection is artificial. The reality is this is mankind. Man is doing this with their imagination. He and society is being freed from old prejudice to be able to do what they need to do. It's just important for you to understand that the urbanization, the effects of all this are affecting people's thinking. So now, as I said, I want to concentrate on that period after the Napoleonic Wars. The French Revolution is an explosion, a disaster of liberalism. It is so synthetic, it goes too far. We're all familiar with the pendulum of political ideology. Sometimes it goes too far left, sometimes it goes too far right. French Revolution is a disaster. You have the French Terror, it consumes its own society. Then as a response to that, they look for Napoleon to organize themselves. The energy to create that goes out. And that often happens in society. For instance, the energy of Nazi Germany, it boils up inside, then expands out. Communism, the idea of world communism, it builds up inside and expands. You could even look at the United States and Western Europe with colonialism or imperialism. There in the late 19th century, America is really galvanizing to become a great industrial power. By 1900, I think we're the third greatest economic power in the world, whereas in the Civil War, we were down at 16th. So there, just in about 20, 30 years, we emerged as this great power. Well, then it's not surprising that Hawaii comes under our sphere. We have a war with Spain, and so Puerto Rico comes under our sphere. The Philippines become under our sphere. We become an imperial power. So this is not a right or wrong thing. It's just a reality that when you have a cauldron of activity inside of a nation, it normally expands out. And that's what we have to be careful for. And you can see that in modern day, people would say China is in that process. It is developing all this cauldron of energy. It is a great economic power. It's consolidating its political power. What's it going to do? Typically, tradition says it expands out. So this is why history is a good piece of information. It's your intel. It makes you informed, and you're saying, well, what are we doing? How are we anticipating? Or how can we manipulate that expansion? So here, what we have is Napoleon goes and expands for all that power, takes over as much of Europe as he can. Old Man Winter stops him in Moscow in 1812, and eventually he's defeated 1815 in Waterloo. In response to that, the nations, the victorious nations, they kind of form their NATO. This is their version of what happens after 1945. So Austria, some of the German principalities, Russia and England, they come together and say, what are we going to do? We have to create a new order. Prince Metternich from Austria is a very famous person who is the conductor of what they used to say the concert of Europe. You may recall that in from earlier days in your studies, there's the Congress of Vienna. This was a big summit that brought everyone together and go, we cannot have another Napoleon. What do we do going forward? How do we organize ourselves to make sure we're stable, that we don't allow one single power to dominate Europe, that we're all connected? I mean, think of where we are now with the European Union. This has been a quest for a very, very long time because the Europeans cannot tolerate one another. That's a reality. They simply cannot tolerate one another. But at least they have the presence of mind to realize that and say, we have to come together at least so that when I punch you, you punch me. And it's just not worth punching anymore. But it is not because of altruistic motivations. It's simply a reality that they can't stand each other. So they come together this way. So Prince Metternich is also understanding this. Congress of Vienna creates this concert of Europe so that all the countries are working together to create this harmony. But that's a response. What is that response? It's conservative. So it put energy back into kings. We gave you all this freedom. What does freedom do? It creates Napoleon. What did Napoleon do? He destroyed Europe. It had people's heads being chopped off. Look what happened to France. Do you know that when the French Revolution occurred, France was the most powerful country in the world, even with its debt. It had twice as much postal lines. Before we had trains, you had roads where people on horses would deliver all the mail. France had twice as much as England did. It was a very wealthy place, and it's all decimated. So the lesson of France was, don't be liberal. Come back and do the right thing, obey your kings, obey your parents, obey tradition, obey authority, do the correct thing, and everything will be fine. It lasted for 10 years. That's how it is in Europe. Once again, you see people brewing up again. And this is a message I also wanted to share with you all, that the movement of the left has always been moving. For 2,000 years, it sometimes slows down, it sometimes appears to kind of stop for a while, but in the broad period of time, not a couple of years, but decade after decade after decade, the concept of progress has been occurring nonstop. So you can't simply say, stop thinking for yourself, do what you're told. It doesn't last long. It just doesn't last long. People start to think for themselves again. And so this is what happens. These Germans are looking at that primogeniture, right? They're saying, there's not much land. We are this, let's see, I don't know where it is. Okay, maybe it's here. So what's happening is because of that industrialization, we are making more money. We are getting access to better food. We are getting better nutrition. We are staying healthy. We're not being decimated by the same amount of disease. So guess what happens? The population is growing and growing and growing. Now overlay that with primogeniture, where are all these boys going to go when they become men? What do? So what they start to think is they get restless. We want to break out of this system. You've got us confined in this situation. It reminds me of the American Revolution. A lot of people say it's taxation without representation, but they forget that 3 years after the Americans gained their independence, the per capita tax on Americans was greater then than it was under the British. It wasn't about tax per se. It was the idea that in 1763, the Proclamation Act limited American expansion west. Well, at that time, around the Appalachian Mountains. And what that basically meant was, if your wealth is based on land, and what you've now said to the American colonists, you can't go west, you just said you're all going to be poor. You're all going to answer to somebody else. Who owns all the land? All the rich people who are our buddies in England. So you're done. Well, that's really what the root cause of it was all these Western Americans who are just, the ones that spit tobacco and wear their hair long and are just difficult to deal with. Well, they're really the inspiration more than the John Hancocks and the Samuel Adams, to be honest with you. But here's the same concept. The German youth are stuck. There's nowhere to grow. They're getting educated. They're getting better education. They're getting better health, but there's nowhere to go. So they start agitating. So this is a period of another kind of revolution. I also thought this was kind of interesting when I was updating this. Yet the society was dominated by the vassals of the farms over the peasants. We often think of this term as a vassal as the poor person, but this just tells you the transformation which is actually taking place. The vassal is a low person only in relationship to the noble. That was the original relationship. You had the king and the nobles going to the landowners to produce money or people to fight in their armies. But there's another class. I was in that class. It was the poor people. It was the peasants. So now that the noble class is being neutralized, you have the vassals over the poor people. So that's what that means, is that these landowners are now controlling them. just as you had like serfs almost. They were almost slaves to the land. And this is when they said, I don't want to live this way. It might be comfortable. I might know where I'm going to sleep this night, but I don't have any say in my life. I don't like it. Now think about that, because one of the core elements of liberalism, most important, is freedom. You all might remember, y'all were little kids probably when this came out, but in the 1950s, they used to say rather be dead than red. Do y'all remember that?
Yep.
That's that same kind of a concept. And of course, there may be times to, modify that kind of view, but it was driven by the fact of freedom. I would rather be a free person than to be somebody's slave. And this concept isn't a racial issue. It's not a gender issue. It's a human issue. And this is what you're seeing here that's happening at this time. Oh, this is the Atlas Verein logo. I just thought you'd be interested to know where the Germans start to come to Texas. It's important to note, though, that the Germans all weren't just coming to Texas. Many of them, I think the Nimitz, they actually came through New Orleans. Other Germans came through Virginia or Ohio, different regions. But this is the popular idea. They come into Indianola, they come in through Galveston, and they go up through the basins to the different locations and stop. But I thought that was kind of interesting because the narrative is now here they are. Now we've had the specific examples. The historical events are what happening. People are responding to it by an idea. One way to look, and these are just two major versions, all right? There are many different types of ideas. And I didn't write this. I'm just sharing with you what I learned about the concept of ideology. But what's important to do is to, in your back of your mind, think of ideology as a flag. The basic idea of a flag is it tells you who that person is. It defines them right off the bat, right? But if I just sit here, you think I'm weird, but you don't know what ideology I have yet. You're going to wait till I start talking. And often we're living our lives like these people were, but it's like when you're really, really close. Have you ever looked at something so close it just doesn't make sense? You can't see it. You got to have perspective. Then you go, oh, that's green and blue, or it's whatever it is. Then you can see it. So what ideology does, it's like a flag that's telling you something about it. If I wave a British flag, you immediately start thinking of ideas. Oh, what a cool accent. They must like tea. Oh, the poor queen. All of a sudden, within 5 seconds, you come up with that concept with me where, the British flag. Now, if I wave the Russian flag, what are you going to think? All right. Or if I wave the Ukrainian flag, good luck, guys. We're going to help you. Something like that, right? These flags are a label. Ideology does the same thing. Political ideology, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a Libertarian, I'm this or that. It's a flag, right? Ah, a Democrat. Oh, a Republican, right? You haven't said anything, but except that's your flag. So ideology does the same thing. That's why it's important. There are two basic concepts here: materialism and Marxism. And B.F. Skinner, behavioralist. So on this side right here, what Skinner, and he's 20th century, and Marx, of course, is 19th century. But the reason why they come together is that essentially what Skinner and behavioralists and materialists argue is the world existed before your thought. So the world exists, you come into the world and you respond, okay? So for instance, Friday, you all are gonna put your coats on because it is cold. But if you didn't know it was going to be cold, would you have thought of the concept of a coat? Now, that's just a specific example. That's not exactly the ideological concept, but the view is you had a thought of something before you reacted to it. The behavioralists believe that your ideas come from the world that you live in. So you come into this world and you learn. You immediately learn. You come into this world with a complete blank slate. And then it's written on. It's written on by your family. It's written on your communities, government, media, friends. And then when you see that, you respond. I like that. I don't like that, but you're responding. Marx says the same thing, except he just gives it the idea that there's always been a ruling class and a peasant class, basically, the proletariat. So he's just specifying that from his experience when he lived in London, how horrible it was under that period of time in Victorian London. But the other view is dialectic materialism. This comes from a man named Hegel. He's a German. And what he was saying, well, oh, this didn't say, that should have been thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So I don't, that's what that means. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. What he says is that when you're born, you have an inherent sense of ideas, specifically right and wrong. So morality. He says that morality and ethics is not just learned, that all, as an example, but all people, when they're born, have the nascent concept as their minds develop of right and wrong. That right and wrong is not learned, that you have right and wrong. Now, obviously, depending on your environment, it can be grossly smashed down. You imagine the poor people being born in North Korea over the past 70 years, how difficult it's been for them to emerge as an independent, free-thinking person because it's such an oppressive society. But the general idea of the Lockean and Hegelian thought is that you come into this world, and Hegel says you do have an idea, and therefore you have an argument, a place. That is your thesis. That is my bottom line. That is right. Then I listen to you, and you say you are wrong, and then I go, I'm kind of right and wrong. And that is the synthesis. That's what he argues. And that's an important distinction to make, because you either believe that we are like leaves that just fall off a branch into a creek and we're responding as it bounces around, or that we have some self-control, that we are possessed with the ability at the beginning to begin offering moral ideas. So that's one of the basic concepts of differences there. So what is ideology? I don't know why that little thing is up there. I don't know why, sorry about that, but that is what is ideology? It is a comprehensive set of beliefs and attitudes about social and economic institutions and processes. It seeks to explain the key problems facing society. It is a general, abstract, systematic set of principles rather than a set of specific, concrete, and random beliefs. So in a way, what you're going to see is that ideology is kind of like ethics. It's a general view from which political ideas can derive from it. So it's not something specific. An ideology isn't going to say brown fences are bad. There's going to be no ideology that talks about that. An ideology might say that barriers are a challenge, but it won't be that specific. So let me look at another example. That's an example of looking at ideology when it comes to morals and ethics. And this is kind of fun. You can look this up on your own, Google it or something like that. So ethics comes from a Greek word, which means character. Morality comes from the Latin word mos, which means custom. And essentially what we do here is we're finding an overlay between morality and ethics, because this is part of how our ideology develops. For instance, ethics comes from a general view. So it's not my ethical opinion. Ethics is something that is an external force that you agree to or you don't. A great example would be the Bible. So the 10 Commandments is what's Deuteronomy, Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the law books. So there you see the 10 Commandments, and in there you have an ethical standard. Thou shalt not kill, right? But morality says, well, sometimes you can, right? Thou shalt not kill. It's an abstract, it's a view, but morality applies an adaptation that's specific. I can't get angry with someone and just kill them. But if my government asks me to kill an enemy that is a legal enemy, I can, if I kill that person following the right rules. So morality is based on a group or an individual that interprets ethics. So this is important because this is connected to the idea of ideology, is what do you do with these ideas? Because partly the idea is ethical and the other idea is morality. Liberal, believe it or not, those of you who have a conservative aspect, the Republican Party is actually under the liberal wing. So of liberalism, Republicans are the right of center under liberalism, and the Democrats would be probably center or center left of liberalism. So what they are doing, political parties are in a way fitting the ideology to their concept. I'll give you another example. How about religion here in Fredericksburg? So we've got Catholics, right, and Lutherans and different. I got to be careful about saying Lutherans and Protestants. I don't want to get in trouble. So different versions of Protestants, right? But then within the Protestant faith, you've got what different denominations? You got Methodist, Baptist, United Church of Christ, Presbyterian. You have a variety of them. So that's another example. That's not either. Any one of those denominations is not the general concept of following the Bible and the 10 Commandments and the Beatitudes in John 3:16. I mean, all you have to do to be a Christian is follow John 3:16, right? That's all you got to do. It's just one verse. Okay, what happened? So you got John 3:16. Well, because everyone wants to adapt it to make it fit into their lifestyle. That's what morality does. Oh, I don't like to dance. Oh, you're a Baptist. I like to drink. Oh, you're a Catholic. I don't know. All right. But everybody has their thing of what they do. I'm from the Northeast, so I know about the Irish Catholics. But so everybody modifies that ethical standard to fit their own lifestyle. And that's what's important. And that's why we should not be so dogmatic about ideology, because all we're doing is culturally amending these ideas to fit our lifestyle. That's really what we do with ideas. So we start with these grand concepts of liberalism. Human beings should be the center of human thought and not God. These are some of the leading people. Adam Smith, we know about Wealth of Nations and Locke, but this just gives you an idea of some of them. So we're going to move from liberalism to socialism. 3 basic features. If you do these first 2, then everyone should be able to have abundance and equality. The reality is if humans are the center, we know how bad humans are, right? That's why it doesn't work. The idea is pretty good, but wouldn't it make sense that we should all share things? But what's the definition of love? Love is that I put you ahead of me because I love you and you love me and you put me ahead of yourself. And if we're doing that equally, it's perfect. It really, really works. Okay, something happens, right? So because it doesn't work, the idea can't work because it's based on the premise that people are basically good rather than not. That's why the socialism is challenged. And you go on from socialism to Marxism and communism. This just kind of puts on the idea that the reason why society doesn't work is designed that there's going to always be more people than what you really need. So this idea, the labor theory of value, there's surplus workers. And so what happens is that you will be an efficient worker. The more you're efficient, the more you specialize at what you do, the costs go down. I don't need as many as you. I own the business. My prices go down. More people buy my goods. I dominate the marketplace and I have a monopoly. This just doesn't work. So you need some type of a regulatory function. So that's that. Now we get into closer to my neighborhood. This is George Bernard Shaw, and he is known as a Fabian. And now this is pretty cool. I went to school in England. 2 of the schools I went to were in England, and they were known as red brick schools. And that was an invention of the 19th century from the traditional education, which was God-centered. Oxford has, I think, 12 colleges, all religious-based. They have their own churches. Cambridge, also religious-based. And that was the first piece of it, God and then our education. The new schools of the 19th century said, man, their brain is first. What they do with that brain is fine. They can make choices and do what they want to, but mankind comes first. And what they believed was, you don't have to have a revolution to improve people's behavior. You can make people behave and get better, but it has to be through an evolutionary process. Their view was, if you made education available as wide as you could, then that generation is going to pass on what they learned, that level of education, to their children. And then those children are going to pass on. Their first original rules of education were you had to go into what we would call the 5th grade, 10 years old. Then the next phase was up to 8th grade. And then it went up to 16. Even when I was living in England, you could graduate English high school at 16 based on your exams and go right into the workforce, not to this 18 thing now. And now some of you have kids, they never grow up. I've got 3 master's degrees, a Ph.D., and you're 50 years old and you're going, will you please get a job and move out of the apartment above the garage? So you can go too far with this idea, but the idea was that you get this educated class slowly learning more, and then you give these people slowly more rights to vote. So you expand the franchise, so you don't just have to own property. And that all happens in the 19th century. You can be a citizen, not own property, but still vote. Some people still think that's controversial, but so you can vote and not own property, and then you get more education and you start voting. Well, who are you voting for? You're voting for enlightened people. People are like, you know, this is crazy, but I think women should have some more rights. What? Are you kidding me? Like, all right, so they're going to give women more rights. And what about people who are disabled? Well, they can just crawl around, can't they? No, they should have a right to be able to have access just like you. What if people are blind? You start to, because of your education, you start to expand and become more inclusive. Like, it's not just about me. I'm just not a primitive person. I actually care about my society. There's all other things you can do. So the Fabians believe that after about 100 years, you'd get a communist society without any revolution. No shooting, no killing. And if it didn't, it's like being a Christian. You're just going in that direction. But in the meantime, you're a nice citizen. You don't even have to be that thing, but you're going in the right direction. This is Confucius. Now we're going to go to conservatives. And this is the last bit that I want to talk to you all about. There are 5 basic concepts of being a conservative. And I think a lot of you are going to identify with these ideas because they're very sound. They're very much organic in nature. But remember, it's always probably going to be a combination. I'm going to look at these 5 in detail. You remember that? I remember that as a little kid. I remember how cool it was in 1976 in the bicentennial. Everything went white. Remember all the white stuff? I said, this is so modern. This is so cool. But now I miss the old ones. But yeah, that was the old little, I don't know, they're not CG5s. Where are they? They're real, the Willie Jeeps, I think, from World War II, right? Willis. So really, really old Jeep. But anyway, that's what they used to look like. Well, first concept is tradition. People like things that make them feel reassured. Christmas songs, Christmas tree, smells, these things root them to their society. It's tradition. Could you imagine if every Christmas it was different, you know, or the smells at your parents' house, you went there were different. So tradition is extremely important. It's one of the first central beliefs of conservatives. See, it's not just this intellectual pursuit. It's a feeling, it's a thought, it's or kind of an organic view. Number 2, humans are clearly not perfect, and they are imperfectible. They are psychologically dependent people. Mostly my students are extremely dependent creatures, and they need safe and helpful advice every week. Religious concepts. So this also connects us to faith. You know, this is a beautiful illustration depicting the feelings that you might get from Adam and Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. This sense of original sin. We are flawed. And now you can take it, you don't have to be a religious person to take a conservative idea, but it aligns itself. Religion, most dominant religions, certainly the creation, the Judaic, Hebrew, Islamic. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the Quran, what we would call the Old Testament and the Jews, the Torah, is exactly the same because it follows the Mosaic, the Abrahamic codes, the Davidic codes, that creation story. Those 3 major faiths share that creation story. So anyway, from a religious point of view, you could tie it into the idea that man has fallen from grace. We all know, therefore they're not perfect. But from a humanist point of view, you can still argue the fact that they're not perfect. Organic society. Individuals cannot be separated from society, that we come into this world with our family and our friends, and that idea of the society exists before people. It's a natural necessity. So that means that when people are born, they're naturally connected to one another. And then at the bottom is a great example here. It says society as a body and its institutions like organs of the body function similarly. So, you know, liberals think it's all about, and we get this confused. In the 20th century, what we use is the word neo. That makes it all wonderful. You're a neo-capitalist. You're a neoliberal. You're a neoconservative. That basically means it's just a hodgepodge of everything, because the reality, there is no one thing, because it's actually liberal to follow the idea of don't help me. I don't need your help. Leave me alone. Just let me have that land and I'll till that land. I got some good brothers and a son here. Leave me alone. Well, now that's been twisted into a view, I don't mean twisted, but just changed and altered to a conservative view. Leave me alone. I don't want any help. You see, that's neoliberal, because liberal means really in our modern sense to be conservative. It just gets all twisted around. That's why, but anyway, this function here is that traditional liberals, the concept was leave me alone. I'm an island to myself. I'm an intelligent person. I have my universe. I can function. But what conservatives are saying, and this is not about being smart or not being smart, it's saying how we're connected. Imagine you take your brain and you've got a brain and a liver and hopefully a few other things. You're all looking at me, so I assume you have a few other things in your chest. But these things all work together. You can't take the liver out and put it on the table and for it to work. It won't work. And then the body won't work. You can't then say, oh, well, maybe we'll take the brain out. Take the brain out, it dies and the body dies. Look at all of your major organs. They function because they're in your body, the body politic, and they know their place. And that's the crucial thing, because what we would like to think is the liver might want to be a heart. But in the traditional conservative ideology, no, you're a liver. Just stay there and keep working. And hopefully you're not with one of those Irish Catholics, right? Because you're gonna be working really hard. And I can say that because my friends are Catholic. Okay, so anyway, so that's very important. Authority. Here, naturally rooted in all aspects of society. Here's just a picture of a coach with some team members. Here, the idea is that a society is grounded with authority. You must have some type of leadership, whether it's the dad in charge or the mom in charge. It's not the kids in charge in a family. We know that would not work. That even from the beginning, there are elders in your society that are looking after you. And as you move through, then you have teachers, and then you have maybe church leaders, and then you have the police and the other elements, coaches. All these people in society, every part of society, you must have authority. Liberals don't like that idea. Traditional liberals don't like the idea of authority because it crimps their freedom. Anything that gets in the way of freedom is suspicious. But what conservatives would say that if you don't have authority, you can't have freedom. What comes first is authority to be able to afford liberty and freedom. That would be the argument. And then the last concept is property. And this was something that it may seem coarse, but it's actually quite important. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of Great Britain from 1979 to 1991, she actually made a very revolutionary thing. She sold what we would call public housing. They called them housing estates. This is where each county or each city owned a certain amount of homes, and they gave them a subsidized rent. So everyone had affordability to live. This was one of the concepts of liberalism. It was a time when England was socialist under Attlee and then Wilson after the Second World War. And they said it is a law that the government must provide housing for all people. So then in every community, they created these public housing estates where people had a place to live. But what Thatcher said was, it's actually disadvantaged to do this, because why would you care about that home? Why would you care about that community? It's just something they give you. It's probably not it can't be the highest quality. And then and how could you then have someone who might care about it and then someone else who doesn't? You all know the example of tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons is the difference between your bathroom and the bathroom, even at Mark Plotz at 4 o'clock on a Saturday, right?
Yes.
Pretty scary, but it's because it belongs to everybody. Why should you go in there and take care of the Mark Plotz bathroom to make it all nice when you know no one else is? But you go to your own bathroom, you can take care of it. So that's the same thing with this public ownership. If you don't have a vested interest, you're not going to take care of it. She argued that if you make homes private, and she made a big deal so they could afford to buy it. But she said, then you'll invest in it. Then you're going to want to paint it. Then you're going to want to take care of it. Someone else, oh, I want to take care of my house. I want to take care of my house. And then what do? You want to make sure you keep that job. So you have money coming in to take care of your home. And then you're taking care of your home, values start to go up, then you can translate that money to do all kinds of different things. So that was the idea. She was saying that home ownership, private property, is actually an important part, the social glue of society. Oops, yes. Oh, so here we go. I'm now at the very end. You've made it. Two little pictures here I want to show with you. One, that is a marble cake. And that is one of my favorite examples that I guess I discovered this concept about 10, 12 years ago, and I just love it. It answers all of my questions in life. marble cake. Because people always saying, well, oh, I don't like it to eat it, by the way, but it's just a great picture. The concept is compare a marble cake to a layer cake. Okay, so say it's a vanilla chocolate like that. Chocolate on the top, vanilla on the bottom. A lot of people view life that way. A right and wrong dichotomy, right? It's either all right or it's all wrong. In the past, everything was better. Now everything is awful. Or everything now is so much better and everything in the past was awful. It's probably a little bit like that. There are certain things that were better in the past. There are certain things in the past that probably weren't. And there are things now that are better, and there are things now that aren't. So to me, the marble cake is a reminder of humility, to realize that life is not that simple. It doesn't matter how much you shout or how many books you read. You're just not going to have all the answers all the time that make you completely right. But you can produce ideas to it. And this is where I want to show this clip of Bertrand Russell, who is one of my heroes. I really like Bertrand Russell. And I'm going to make sure this was the 3-minute clip, not the 20-minute clip. Oh, no, this is the 30-minute clip.
For those of us who reject Marx, can you offer any positive philosophy to help us toward a more hopeful future?
Well, as to that, you see, I think one of the troubles of the world has been the habit of dogmatically believing something or other. And I think all these matters are full of doubt, and the rational man will not be too sure that he's right. I think that we ought always to entertain our opinions with some measure of doubt. I shouldn't wish people dogmatically to believe any philosophy, not even mine. Not even mine. No, I think we should accept our philosophies with a measure of doubt. What I do think is this, that if a philosophy is to bring happiness, it should be inspired by kindly feeling. Now, Marx is not inspired by kindly feeling. Marx pretended that he wanted the happiness of the proletariat. What he really wanted was the unhappiness of the bourgeois. And it was because of that negative element, because of that hate element, that his philosophy produced disaster. A philosophy which is to do good must be one inspired by kindly feeling and not by unkindly feeling.
Summing up, Lord Russell, do you feel that there is hope for the world today?
So I'll stop right there. Well, that's the most important part. Yeah, he said no. Exactly, it ruins the whole program. Everyone hates this. Let me see if I can. Okay. Whoops. So the concept here then is that yes, you have to have the courage for yourself, but you have to do the work to acquire the tools so that you can be a free person in a free land. And I just want to remind you of all these ideologies. They inspire people. They inspire the Germans to come here, and where that German inspiration fit into European history, those different competing ideas, how it's a little story, but it's connected to a much bigger story. And that's really interesting, I think, because that makes our story here in this little town really relevant for the world, because we're one of those tangents that came out of that explosion of ideas and experiences. And that's in all of you. Whether genetically or you've come here and you borrowed that idea, you're thinking that way. You have that inherited ability, whether you adopted it or you got it through blood, to believe in yourself. But the challenge is not to become complacent and think we've got all the answers. It's to constantly challenge ourselves. And as Lord Russell said, is your idea inspired by kindliness and love towards others? Or is it a response in hatred to another group? And that's a real ideological mirror for all of you to ask yourselves, what is inspiring you in your society, whether it's Fredericksburg or the United States? So have the courage to think for yourself. Thank you all very much. I talk a lot, don't I? Yeah, well, I know it's exactly right. It was 1 hour. It's not too bad. Yes, sir.
You're hearing a lot lately about fascism. Is it fit under one of those other umbrellas?
Yes.
Like communism?
Well, this is kind of an interesting question. You pose a good question. Ideologically, it fits under conservatism. Okay, it's right of center. But here's because I know where you're getting at. What I showed you was a one-dimensional kind of graph. It was like liberal left, and it was going, and then it went socialism, communism, Fabians, and then it went conservative, and I stopped. But I could have kept going. On the other side of liberalism is atheist, and it's an anarchist. I mean, there's just no control, right? There's total freedom without any control. But if you keep going on, you come to fascism, you come to totalitarianism. That's actually on a one-dimensional scale. But what you're thinking is, what if we took that scale? Let's go. I don't have a thing. See, I miss old-fashioned classrooms. I'm like, where to write? But if you had chalkboard, but if you have that one-dimensional, you can also make it two-dimensional. Because you might say to me, well, David, what is the difference between Stalin and Hitler? Because Stalin was left of center. He was communist. Hitler was right of center. He was fascist. But if you had a two-dimensional graph and authority was at the top, they'd both be up. So from the casual, they looked the same. The actual reality of what it was like living under Stalin and Hitler was the same, but their origin is different. The same thing if you look, for instance, at communism. Let's say you're looking left just on one side of that dimension, just the left side. That's right. So this side, left side. What's the difference between communist China and let's say at the time, socialist Sweden? They're both left to center, but one down here, which is freedom, is Sweden. And back up there in that top part of the graph is China. So that's what the added complexity is. You have to add that two dimension. But ideologically, strictly speaking, fascism is right of center.
Maybe,
Yes, sir.
maybe a little bit of a discussion, I think in one of the slides was going on ethics and morality. There was a statement there on theft or stealing being morally, maybe morally okay. Maybe expand on that. I mean, is that if someone steals from you, you can steal it back? Or,
All right. It's actually, there's a simple example, and then there's a real complex example. The simple complex is a hurricane goes through your neighborhood. Okay, it knocks out your power. You've got two little twin girls who are 2 years old. They need food. They need water. They need milk. You need bread. And the 7-Eleven is demolished, but it's still there. You open the door. There's no one to beat up. You're not hurting anyone. And the refrigerator is about to die, but you can go ahead and get some milk and get some food, and you leave. And now you might say, well, you're going to leave some money there. Well, you're not going to leave any money there. You know what's going to happen. So you're going to take, you can put maybe an IOU, but they'll get blown away. So maybe that's not a good idea. You want someone to come in and go, oh, that's where all the food is. Come on, everybody. So you're probably going to get your food and go home. You stole that. That is unethical, but morally acceptable. You have any more? Now, what's more complex is when people argue about an eclectic, what is it called? A kleptocracy. A kleptocracy is a mean way of saying a neo-capitalist system, what we have now. Some people would say the very rich are stealing from the rest of us. That's what they would say. That would be the ideological argument. They had an advantage, whether it's by race, or whether it's by inheritance, whether it's by your family privilege, or you had some advantage and you're not using your authority to help. You're just trying to get more and more and more. Can you steal from them? You know, and what would that look like? Well, it could be taxation. Some people would argue, right? So ethically, yes, you can't steal, but the easiest way to redistribute wealth is taxation. Well, depending on your perspective. So that's what I mean. Morality is what we do in this room, what we agree on. The next step is, where do we get our inspiration from? What's that external force, which is our ethics that we borrow from? And most ethics say stealing is wrong. I'm not aware of any major ethical external source that says killing is okay. They all say killing is wrong, but the devil's in the detail. It's in the morality. Morality is where it's at, not ethics, really. Does that make a little sense? Yes, ma'am.
So you said something about atheism, and going beyond that leads to anarchy. Implying, at least to me, that maybe atheism has no authority base.
Before you say anything else, I made a mistake. I meant to say anarchist. So I can't even possibly argue what I said because I made a mistake. I didn't even mean to say atheist. I meant to say anarchist.
Oh, okay.
So I was trying to correct myself, but it seemed like I was leading that one went to the other. So I just wanted to stop you. Not when you're rude, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna make something up, but that's not going to happen. I did not mean to say it.
Well,
So,
thank you
yes.
for that clarification.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yeah, because I didn't mean to say that. Yes, sir.
So if you step back and look at it from a different perspective, in one sense, in my mind at least, I think this whole thing about morals and ethics is about who is in our group and who is not in our group, who is in our situation, who is not in our situation, who are the insiders, who are the outsiders. And you said earlier that through time, things have been becoming more inclusive
Yes.
as opposed to getting less inclusive through time. So if you were to predict the future, who is in our group? Who will be in our group next month, or next year, or next 100 years from now?
Well, that's true. So we talk about is self-filtering, and we do that. We filter that. But one thing, maybe this is not directly how to answer it, but I want to share with you how I would approach answering that question. And that is something I shared with my class last night, was that we were sharing with them that countries have kind of a DNA personality. I'll give you an example, Russia. You have Putin, but Putin really isn't very much different than Stalin. And Stalin really wasn't that much different than their czars. And you can look at China. China has President Xi, but President Xi wasn't very much different than the emperors. There are certain national personalities that go in a certain direction. They have autocratic personalities. Can that change? I don't know. Can your personality change? Okay, so one thing to think about, for instance, to answer your question, how I would try to approach it, is that England, one of the things that came through when looking at Victorian and Edwardian England and its culture and its one nation conservatism under Disraeli, Gladstone, and the others in the 20th century, and its architecture, and how the city governments developed their strategies of how to switch to tall buildings. And in England, their personality is compromise. They're very temperate. By and large, they're pretty temperate. They try to work things out. They try to be very rational and find it. And there's a reason for that. Because if you're not rational, you get kicked out and then you can't make any decisions. Kind of like what the Soviets did in 1950 when the North Koreans invaded South Koreans. The Soviets said, we're walking out on the Security Council. We're not going to be a part of this. And the other four were like, are you kidding me? Because the Security Council, one person vetoes, you can't do anything. Well, the one country that could have vetoed left. So the other four said the UN is going to go to war to protect South Korea. So if you walk out, you have no power. But if you stay in, it's rational. I would say that in America, what we're experiencing right now, just from a historical point of view, because I don't like to think I'm a sage and I'm that old. I like to think that I'm some whippersnapper and like, what is he talking about? So I only say this from what I've read and what I've studied. But it seems to me that we did inherit from England a compromised nature. If you look at our Constitution, you look at the balance between power with the states, the Senate, the balance of the power with the people in the House of Representatives, and then the presidency and the judiciary, and just how we live our lives. It's generally compromised, but there have been some key times where it hasn't. The Civil War was an occasion where we couldn't compromise. The Revolutionary War was an occasion where we could not compromise. And some might say that we're in a period now where we seem to be at loggerheads, where we all are taking dogmatic positions, which Lord Russell said, don't do. It doesn't help. It just doesn't help. But I think we'll get past it. So I don't know if in the larger sense of this room's our moral or the national sense or a political sense, I think we'll become accommodating again. Now, maybe you think that I'm an airhead. I don't know what I'm talking about. But it's my sense in studying 400 years of American history, our DNA, our national DNA and personality is a compromised nature. And I think that just because you have an argument at that moment, you're not very compromising. How many of you have been in an argument that creates another argument, which creates a third argument, and you don't even know what the first argument was? You're just arguing about the knock-on argument. Come to think of it, I've got this to say too, So, but when it's all cleared, you go back to that central position. And if you do love each other, and I still believe that at its core, Americans do love each other. I think this is just a bad, uncomfortable period, but we've had those before. And I think if we just try to think of how we love each other and our ideas and our politics, doesn't mean that you agree to everybody. Doesn't mean, I think you're totally wrong and do whatever you say. That's not love. You have to be engaged in a conversation. And remember, like my mother said, I used to argue about all kinds of things. She said, David takes two to tango. Because I was always saying, it's that person's fault, it's that person's fault. She said, well, what's your responsibility? It takes two to tango. And it can only work if there really is that effort of somebody else to love you. And that's when you hear all that jargon all the time about leadership. That's what they mean. I don't think they mean we need leadership for someone to articulate anything better on the right or the left. I think what we need is someone to articulate the bridge. And that's what seems to be missing, is that type of leadership. See you, Becky. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking, when you were talking about a free person in a free land, having lived in Germany, you're talking about this DNA. and
Yes.
this bit, because I used to say when I lived there, it's a very orderly place to live, and that was really nice, but there was a policeman that lived in every German's head,
Ah,
and they're always telling you, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is when you're supposed to do it, and there was a collective agreement of that. But I could see how people whose DNA was a little bit different than that would say, let's get out of there.
see, and that's funny because I've been to Germany, not that extensively, but I have visited Japan several times. They share that German attitude of conformity. There is a thing, and isn't it interesting, during World War II, they were on the right side, the conservative side, that right side of history. I remember I went there with a group of students once, and they are so strict at following, almost like how the English never want to get called out, like you're the person laughing the loudest. Everyone looks at you. They don't want that ever to happen. But the Japanese were even the worst. I remember I was with a group of Americans, like 2 or 3 boys, I think, teenage boys, and we were. We'd gone somewhere, we were coming back to our hotel, and it was like 11:30 at night. We had been to some event, and we were coming back, and it was 11:30, and it wasn't Tokyo, it was some other city. There were no cars on the road at all. And it was nobody. It was like it was completely dead. They were such an obedient society. At 9 o'clock, they all went home, went to bed. Great, wonderful. So we go to a crosswalk. I'm not exaggerating. There were no cars in the entire city. We go to the crosswalk. It has the little red man. And so we stop, and I'm like, and there was the Japanese couple were there, and they were stopped. So we stopped, like, what are they? So we're looking around, and there's no one. We're really trying to be careful. Do you see anybody walking? Are there motorcycles? Are there cars? But there was that little red man, and those 2 Japanese people were standing there. So then we said, Mr. Bold adult, I'm going to lead you all across. Let's just go. So we walked across. So we walked across, and as we got, nothing happened. It's basically midnight. We kind of looked back, and those Japanese people were just staring at us like, we're Godzilla. What on earth did those people do? We were there for 2 weeks. By the end of the week, we were the most obedient Japanese people at a crosswalk. We stood there, we didn't do a thing. We just wanted to, and then when it went green, we all walked it's so funny what society does to you. And that's what I mean by have the courage to think for yourself. That's a funny example, but it can be tough, how you conform to a society.
We jaywalked one time when my dad was there, and this little woman came up to us and was just giving us what for, because you're not supposed
You're
to
walking in the wrong direction. Fit in. Exactly. Well, folks, thank you all very, very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed sharing these ideas with you. It was fun for me, and I hope you have a warm weekend. Thank y'all. Bye-bye. Thank you. Yeah, I know, exactly. I've got 10 trees to run to my car. Yes, sir.
I always do this to people.
Oh, no.
So don't.
That we did.
Yeah, you're 5,400.
I would go a step earlier in why this whole industrial thing,
Yeah.
and that it was a geologist named William Smith who mapped the geology of the British Isles. And from that map, they could predict where all the coal mines were.
Oh, really?
Oh, and so all of a sudden it used to be wherever the coal cropped out of the surface, that's where you could tell.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
But now you could say, if we dig an adit here and down, or shaft down, we're gonna hit coal at 400 feet.
But you see, that could still fit into the concept that, was that God or man?
No, that was man.
See, so that's, so-
But it was like, it caused the acceleration of that whole
That's what I'm saying.
industrial complex.
that's what I'm saying, it would
Yeah.
fit in. If I include that, it's not at odds.
No, no,
Depending
no,
on
no,
your
no, no,
perspective.
I'm not
You
at
can-
odds with you.
No, no,
I'm
that's
saying-
what I'm agreeing. Great.
Right, I'm just saying that, you know, it was the point at which, in geology, there was a point at which there was the diluvianists
Yeah,
who believed that, you know, all the geology was laid down during the flood.
yeah.
And then the process people who said, no, there's strata, you know, and
Oh, and you know that the thing that I learned about the strata thing was then when they also discovered, I don't know if this is the 20th century or what, was that it loops over. That I forgot what that's called. It's just not layer, because they were finding layers here that were like supposed to be down there. They were on top because it kind of folds over. Exactly, and then that brings everything over. And then that's like, because I remember the Kraken, or was it in Scotland, the Knockin Craig. And there was an investigation into Knockin Craig, and it was confusing everybody because they were saying, this is wrong. This completely messes up geology because this is the wrong. And then they discovered, oh, it's looping, it's folding.
it's folding.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, but you know, they understand the geometry of where these mines, respective mines are going to be.
Right, and then you
It
can,
opens up, all of a sudden you have energy, then you've got Watt that comes up with a steam engine, you got